Hello, everyone. I'm Sheila Ager, Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Waterloo, and I'd like to extend to you a very warm welcome to this first virtual event in the Indigenous Speakers Series, a series that's run through the collaboration of the Faculty of Arts with the Waterloo Indigenous Student Centre. As you all realize, we did have to put a brief pause in place because of the pandemic, but I'm really happy that we've now found a way to continue with this in an online forum. One of its advantages is that we can record this event and people will be able to access that recording and watch it at their leisure. Although we're not all able to be together at the university, and although running the event remotely means that we're reaching an audience that's scattered far and wide, this is a University of Waterloo event, and it's appropriate and essential to acknowledge the history of the land that's been home to the University of Waterloo for over 60 years. UW acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is centralized within our Indigenous Initiatives Office. More than a simple statement, the territorial acknowledgement should provide a pause for reflection, especially at this time when we're all so distanced from each other. Many of you here today are probably on land of Indigenous significance quite apart from the Six Nations location of the University of Waterloo. So I'd like to acknowledge also, however briefly, the history of these other territories across the whole of Turtle Island. And this brings me to expressing my sincere thanks and welcome to today's special guest, Dr. Evan Adams from the Tliayaman First Nation near Powell River. Dr. Adams is joining us today from BC to discuss with us the impacts of COVID-19 on Indigenous communities across Canada. Our colleague Laurie Campbell will be giving Dr. Adams a full introduction shortly. Right now, though, as part of the traditional setting of the Indigenous Speakers Series, I'd like to introduce Jadam Hunt. Jadam is a master's candidate in our Department of Psychology, a member of the Indigenous Student Association, and she's also the Campus Partnership Coordinator with UW's Graduate Student Association. Jadam will be singing us a welcome song.
Thank you so much for that intro, Sheila. It's an honor to be here to be doing the opening today for Evan Adams. My name is Jadam Hunt, as Sheila had mentioned, and I'm Mohawk Bay of Quinte from Six Nations, and I'm going to sing the Mohawk Friendship Song for our opening today. Sorry about that, everyone. I don't want the dog singing through the opening, so I'm just going to adjust that. Sorry about that. So, okay, there we go. I'm just going to keep going. Sorry about that, guys. Yahweh ho, Yahweh ho, we oh, we ah, we ah, we ah, we ah, go ya, we ah, Yahweh ho, Yahweh ho, we oh, we ah, hey, we ah, we ah, we ah, we everyone. Apologies for that little, I have a new puppy and he just really wanted to join in with singing. But now I would like to take the time to introduce Laurie Campbell, the director of the Waterloo Indigenous Student Center, who will be moderating our event today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jadam. Tanseen tottamak. Nanasko mamawi otawa mamitani miwasen kota kisigawa wapahtamak. Nia Laurie Campbell, Nia Two-Spirit Nehio Pitagos Sanasqueo. Nagawi Muniawi, Sagihigani Treaty 6 Territory, Ki Litinok Saskatchewan Ochio. Najite Tan Ota Ayayan, Kikistayit the Mihinawa Miwasen, Nataskabao. So hello and welcome, my friends. I thank the Creator because it's so beautiful that we get to see another day, and that I hope everyone is keeping well and safe and connected during this time of COVID. So I'm a Two-Spirit Cree Métis from Montreal Lake in Treaty 6 Territory in northern Saskatchewan, and as Jadam said, the director of Sadijirota, the Waterloo Indigenous Student Center. Before I introduce our guest of honor, I would like to also introduce my co-moderator today, and Stephanie Marr, if you can give a little wave. Stephanie is Anishinaabe from Lac Seul First Nation and graduated from the University of Waterloo in 2019 with a degree in biomedical sciences. She is currently a first-year medical student at McMaster Waterloo campus and is the vice president of Indigenous Health on their student council. And Stephanie, during her time at U Waterloo, was greatly involved in the Indigenous Student Center and the Indigenous Student Association. And yeah, so we're very happy to have her join us here today as well. So now it is my honor today to welcome Dr. Evan Adams as our special guest. Evan Adams is a Coast Salish actor and physician from the Tla'amin First Nation near Powell River, BC. Evan stars as Thomas Builds the Fire in Miramax's Smoke Signals, written by Sherman Alexie and directed by Chris Eyre. He also won Best Actor awards from the American Indian Film Festival and from First Americans in the Arts, and a 1999 Independent Spirit Award for Best Debut Performance. He won a 2011 Gemini Award for co-hosting the National Aboriginal Achievement Awards along with Adam Beach. Aside from his career in the arts, which is amazing, Evan has completed a medical doctorate from the University of Calgary in 2002 and a residency in the Aboriginal Family Practice Program at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, BC. Dr. Adams has a Master's of Public Health from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. He was the first ever Aboriginal Health Physician Advisor in the Office of the Provincial Health Officer in the BC Ministry of Health. He was the Deputy Provincial Health Officer for the province of BC from 2012 to 2014, and he is currently the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of the First Nations and Inuit Health Authority with Indigenous Services Canada. And before I officially bring Dr. Adams onto the screen, I just want to let the listeners know today that you can ask questions in the Q&A of the presentation. And if somebody else asks a question that you particularly like and want to amplify to make sure that it does get asked on screen, then just please click on the like sign and that will bring it up. And without further ado, to bring on our special guest, I welcome Dr. Adams.
Thank you very much, Laurie Campbell. What a lovely introduction, and it is really an honor to be here today with you to share some thoughts in this particular area. And I know that it's very important for speakers to tell stories. As a point of illustration, I think stories are data, and I'm quite prepared to do that. And a special hello to all the Indigenous people out there who are very accustomed to storytelling as part of learning. So before I begin, I'd like to say thank you to Professor Susan Roy, to Wendy Philpott, and thank you again, Laurie. And Jadam, I loved your singing. What a gift, and your dog made me laugh out loud. My dog has done exactly the same thing to me, and I'm surprised how calm you were, because I kind of lost my mind the last time my dog interrupted one of my sessions. Thanks, Stephanie, for being here, and Megan Live for being so patient with the setup for today. It is quite a lot of work to appear virtually, and it's actually kind of a gift, because before in the olden days, we used to have to travel quite a lot of time in order to share some time with you. So my name is Tlesla Evan Adams, and this first slide is a picture of me in a movie I did, because I was actually an actor for a very long time, for about 12 years. I left biochemistry at McGill in order to become a professional actor, and I worked quite a lot. I did several dozen shows as an actor before I returned to university when I was 30 to become a doctor. And it was really a very interesting switch from being an actor to being a doctor. And I think that's why I get invited sometimes, because I get invited sometimes because I've worked in these two different professions, and in the arts and in the sciences. And I hope that I can share some of that, what that might be like with all of you today. So let's, oh, sorry. This movie is called Smoke Signals. It was written by Sherman Alexie, who's a very famous novelist who wrote the screenplay as well, adapted his own novel for the screen. And I got to play this character, Thomas Builds a Fire, in the front. And lots of Native people have seen this, so much so that when it came out when I was starting medical school, and when I was on the wards, Native people would say things like, "What are you doing here?" They thought I was a character in a movie and not a real person. And I remember delivering a baby once, and the mom coming up to me later and saying that she felt like it was a dream. You know, she was straining and laboring, and she opened her eyes, and there was Thomas Builds the Fire, my character, standing between her legs. And so I've always, I think actually I get a lot more play having been an actor and still continuing to act than I do as a doctor. People still see me as an actor more, perhaps. Anyway, next slide. So I've called this presentation today, "A Foot in Two Worlds and Two-Eyed Seeing." Not about me, but about you. That you, the audience, have a foot in two worlds, in a Western world, in a Canadian world, and in an Indigenous world, in that Canada is built on Indigenous roots. Indigenous people were the first peoples here, and they are still here, and their lands and territories that they used to own are now shared with settlers. And the special relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples is about us walking together, and not about Indigenous people being subsumed by Canadian culture. That is a concept that I did not learn when I was in school, and had to really experience and learn about in life. And it has been quite a gift. Sorry, I just have to make sure my timer is has been set so that I don't go over time. Thanks very much. So today I'll be talking about Canada's Indigenous roots, and about all of us having a foot in two worlds, about two-eyed seeing, or seeing from two different points of view, like having two eyeballs, two different points of view unified in a single vision. And I will talk a little about COVID and a lot about Indigenous health. And how they're related. Let's go to the next slide. This is Ayus. It's an island in my territory. It's called in English Savory Island. And if you cut it along its long spine, it looks like a snake, you cut it along its long spine, on the right side of the island, there are about 3,000 postage stamp sized pieces of real estate now in private ownership. Really tiny pieces of land where there are these beautiful cottages. And this island's famous for its white sandy beaches. On the left side of the island, it's still in our ownership, and it's completely undeveloped. There isn't a tap there. There isn't a concrete pad. There's no place to launch your boat officially. And I remember a physician saying to me, a white physician saying to me, "Oh, we feel sorry about all this. We would really like to help you develop your side of the island." And I laugh because it never occurred to me. I felt sorry for the people on the right side of the island where it's really overdeveloped, and we love the pristine nature of our side. And it's pristine because we've kept it that way. And I'm using this island as a metaphor for Canada and Indigenous peoples. We can think of them as two solitudes. Sometimes we portray Quebec and Anglo-Canada as the two solitudes, but I think Indigenous peoples and Canadians are also two solitudes. And if we were divided, like put on reserves, and everyone else, other Canadians off reserve, and we share the land and we live next to each other, how do we share these resources? How do we share the water source? How do we share things like, if I was going to put a clinic on this island, where would that clinic go? And last of all, Lester B. Pearson, during his Nobel Peace Prize lecture in 1957, said, "How can there be peace without people understanding each other? And how can this be if we don't know each other?" And unfortunately, for most Canadians, they don't get a lot of Indigenous perspectives in the course of their lives. I think this is in part by design. That's just how it's always been. So for instance, the setting up reserves. Remember, we didn't set up reserves. We didn't choose to live on reserves. We were put on reserves, and we were put under something called the Indian Act, which actually made it illegal for us to leave the reserve and for other Canadians to come onto the reserve. It used to be illegal for y'all to come on reserve, and that actually still persists. In that non-native people don't habitually come onto reserve unless they're invited. And there are divisions between us. Let's not be naive. The relationship between Indigenous people and other Canadians is fragile. It is definitely better than it is in many other countries where there are Indigenous people. There are about 400 million Indigenous peoples around the world in 80 countries, more than 80 countries, original peoples who were moved aside for waves of immigration. And that's in Australia, in the United States, all across Latin America, the Americas, in Asia, like in India, in Japan. There are Indigenous peoples in Oceania and Pacifica. There are Indigenous peoples there who share their lands with settlers. And that's not a bad thing. We're people, we have legs, we're not barnacles, we move around. And I learned a lot when I went on sabbatical in Hawaii, and I was not Indigenous to there. And I had to learn to be a good guest there. And luckily, of course, I was very interested in Indigenous people in their culture and language. And I was very excited to sit and to learn and to be a part of Hawaii. And that was instructive to me when I came home. So the next slide, please. Just so this is called positionality. For us as Indigenous people, this is very important for us to be honest and to be transparent, to be authentic and to be humble, and to say, I'm from a particular place, Tla'amin, this is my family, I'm sitting in my dad's lap. I have 4 sisters, or I had 4 sisters, and one of my sisters passed away when I was about 5 years old, and as we were waiting for an ambulance to come, and we were so stressed, waiting for an ambulance to come to try and help her, and ultimately she passed away very quickly. It's no mistake that now my work is to help communities deal with medical emergencies. I come from a particular situation where Indigenous communities were under-resourced, and where they are quickly trying to build and have exactly what they need in order to live a good life. Next slide. And I want to talk about two-eyed seeing. And two-eyed seeing is, you see there are two eyes here. They actually see from different points of view, but they unify in our brains to create a single vision. It's why you have two eyes, but most of us don't have double vision. Our vision, our fields of view converge together into a picture that we can interpret. And this two-eyed seeing gives us a wider field of vision and gives us depth of focus, both of which have been extraordinarily important to our evolution as peoples. It helps us hunt better, it helps us gather better, it helps us understand each other. So for instance, in my culture, we say, people can see when you're lying. They can see in your face when you are dishonest or when you are bad. And so this concept of vision, seeing, interpreting, understanding is extremely important. And we have two eyes. And of course, the symbolism is that we can carry different points of view within us. For some of us, this is very innate. For some of us, this is completely natural and normal to see things from two different perspectives, maybe from many different perspectives. Maybe as a two-spirited person who can see with a male vision or a female vision. Maybe some of you are from multicultural backgrounds where you have pluralistic viewpoints, where you see from a religious point of view or from a linguistic point of view or from a national or ethnic point of view that is different than the context that you live in. And for some of us, two-eyed seeing is incredibly difficult. For many of us, we've learned a single reality, and we feel that that reality must prevail, should prevail, and there's very little room for us to take in the realities of others. And I find that honestly a bit odd. Why wouldn't we want to carry multiple realities within us? For instance, traveling. Remember when we used to travel? Remember when we used to go to different places and we would experience differentness? For many of us, differentness is very interesting and part of the human condition. And so I just want to encourage our pluralism, and I'm going to expound on this idea a lot. Next slide. For Indigenous people, having two-eyed seeing is completely natural and normal. We are taught to look back at our haloed past to learn our histories and our inheritance. We have this timeless wisdom that is passed to us about how to be and how to know and to be within our territories or our languages and cultures to be at peace. At the same time, we know that non-Indigenous people are here. Canada is here. They're not going anywhere. And for many of us, there are experiences and things within Western society that are incredibly interesting. Things like modern medicine, things like technologies, and higher learning, which are incredibly exciting. But looking back at the same time as looking forward is maybe not something that some of you do. Maybe some of you do this quite normally. But for us, we learn it quite intentionally. We are asked to do this. And it does take a bit of practice. And I encourage all of you to hold older realities and what's in front of you all at once. Next slide. We as Indigenous people are also asked to look outward and inward at once. We're encouraged from when we're very young to look inward, to have an inner life, to hear our inner voice, to hear our own song, to be strong and well within ourselves. So as an example, we are told that we must learn to pray, to learn to be quiet and be at peace, just with sitting with ourselves and looking inward. That we need to learn to be able to sleep at night with the decisions that we've made or the realities that are in front of us. We're told to learn to be strong, to endure, to have respect, as in to hold someone else's reality within us. And we're taught that love endures, that someone can live inside of you, even if they're gone. And I remember my mother saying to my mother once, "Do you think about your own mother?" And she just started crying and she said, "I think about my mother every day." And my mother is 80 and her mother's been gone since the 60s. And it was a reminder again that our inner life is vivid and real. So we are in our culture are asked to go inward, to let that inner self actualize, and to be very conscious of it. Another way of looking at this inner-outer vision is that we, as Indigenous people, know that we are living in the same places as our ancestors. Same place, but a different time. And that duality of realities is extraordinary. You know, that your great-great-grandmother, where I'm sitting now was my great-grandmother's house, and she was born in the 1860s. And that, you know, for 1,000 generations before that, my people have been here, and I am just a simple continuation of those lives, is extraordinary and banal at the same time. Next slide. And of course, two-eyed seeing is crazy making. It's difficult. It's difficult to have two realities at once. So for example, for you who are students, you have this obligation to higher learning, but you also have an obligation to your family. And if you've ever had to be split between a final exam and a family emergency, you know what I mean. They're both incredibly important and it tears at you. It's crazy making. To have that split focus and to make a decision about which way you go. And certainly as a medical student, I miss many, many, many things in my life that I would have liked to have been to, including experiences with my children, including funerals of extraordinary mentors and elders and loved ones, because that's what I agreed. And I have to live with the pain of those decisions. And for all of you, you will also make decisions around the duality, the pluralism of your existence, and live with those choices, especially as students. Next slide. And of course, the point of all this, to have two-eyed seeing, to have a multiplicity of realities, is to find balance. As an example, some of you are very young and beautiful. Some of you are very strong, maybe athletic. Some of you are maybe expressive or creative. Maybe some of you are parents already. Certainly many of you are children or adult children, and you have obligations to your siblings and or to your parents. And you must find balance in that. I was an actor. There were times where there were lots of demands on me to be an actor who showed up, maybe even sometimes to be a good actor. But I was never I was never to the point where I always want to be a good actor and forget about being a dad. Just be a lousy parent. Being a lousy parent is fine if I'm a good actor. It was never like that. It was always about finding the balance, because for most of you, in fact, I'm sure for all of you, there are many roles that you want to succeed in, not just one. You don't want to be just a good worker. You don't want to be just a good dad. From speaking to dads, many of them have other things they want to do besides being a dad. Maybe they want to be a good earner, for example. Maybe some of you have things like things that are interesting and fun for you. The pursuit of pleasure is completely human. And for many of you, you probably do things that are quite enjoyable and they're an important part of your day. So balance in two-eyed seeing, or balance in what you see and what you look at is important. Next slide. So this two-eyed seeing was really expounded upon by this extraordinary elder and, dare I say, academic, Albert Marshall, who was a Mi'kmaq from Eskasoni First Nation, where we can see with one eye of the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and with the other eye, the strengths of Western knowledges and ways of knowing, and we can hold them at once. So I can try and be a good physician with many years of Western training. I can also try and be someone with traditional knowledges, an elder in training, who is trying to be the center of a community or the center of a family, who's grounded and helpful. Next slide. So very quickly, this two-eyed seeing then allows us to read this, 1492, the year Native Americans discovered Columbus lost at sea, to hold two realities and be able to laugh at this. So we can have a dominant culture viewpoint, Columbus, the sacred voyageur who was looking around the world, or for Native Americans that, you know, we found him lost. He thought he was in India. He was trying to find India, but he was in the Caribbean, and we can laugh about that. Laugh about the sacred cow. Next slide. And we can hold 2 points of view in that we can be sympathetic or empathetic to Columbus and him stepping into what he called the New World, and be where we can put ourselves in the viewpoint of the Taino, Taino people, indigenous peoples of the Caribbean who met him, and they wore white clay paint on their bodies, partly as decoration, partly as sunscreen. And they met him, and the collision of those two visions, those 2 points of view, was extraordinary. Many of you don't know this, but Columbus was in the trade of humans. Part of what Columbus was looking for were people to enslave and to sell and to make money, to subjugate the people. And he spoke quite openly about this, and we don't really learn about that, but in his writings you will see he was delighted that the indigenous people seemed to be very fun-loving and easily subjugated. And he killed many of them in order to make others comply. And also, the Spanish and others who came with him had many infectious diseases that really decimated populations, millions of people. So for indigenous peoples, so maybe for explorers, this was the age of exploration, but for indigenous peoples, this was the beginning of an extraordinary cataclysm that the world has seldom seen. Next slide. This is a painting, a depiction of the death of Captain James Cook on Valentine's Day in 1779. As you may know, Captain James Cook took at least 3 world voyages visiting Australia, New Zealand, North America, and in this case, Hawaii. And on his 3rd voyage to Hawaii, he was trying to force local indigenous peoples to help him restock and repair his ship, and they would not comply. And so he killed a couple, and then he attempted to kidnap an ali'i, an elder royal person named Kalaniʻōpuʻu. And for that, James Cook was killed by Native Hawaiians, or Hawaiians as they call themselves, in 1779. And aboard this ship was a midshipman named George Vancouver. And George Vancouver had his own ship several years later and traveled to, let's go to the next slide, traveled to the coast of British Columbia, including to my mother's village in 1792. And this is a drawing made by one of Vancouver's artists of the village on what is now called Quadra Island, my mother's village. Just a reminder that accompanying George Vancouver were 2 Spanish explorers and 2 Spanish ships, Galeano and Valdez y Flores, and we don't hear a lot about them too. Sometimes history is selective, or it doesn't expound a lot on what was occurring. I put this up there because indigenous people were there around the establishment of Canada. My family was there. And sometimes that doesn't get told enough. Next slide. This is my great-grandfather. Atam, please continue to allow me to talk about my family, because my great-grandfather Atam was born in 1860, and in 1862 was a great smallpox pandemic that started in San Francisco and whipped south to the Americas, but also whipped north up to Alaska. And a third of Indigenous peoples on the coast of British Columbia, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California died from smallpox, like the most phenomenal pandemic, and actually only one of 3 waves of smallpox that decimated the North American coast. So besides killing a third of the people that it infects, smallpox also blinds people. And it blinded my great-grandfather as a baby. And here in this picture, he's 70. This picture was taken in 1930 by a physician who was seeing my great-grandfather, who noted his incredible scars on his body. Smallpox creates a pox, or a hole, scars in one's body. And that, of course, that he was blind. And our family stories were that my blind great-grandfather would be led into the forest by his daughters, and he would feel around to find wood to cut. And he would cut that wood with a handsaw, and his daughters would come and get him as it was getting dark to bring him home, and they would sell the wood that he cut. And whenever I feel sorry for myself about how busy I am, I think of him and the life that he had because of disease and because of the circumstances of the time. The next slide is just an article about the smallpox epidemic of 1862, if any of you want to read further about it. Next slide. My parents met in residential school. And this is a photo of the residential school in Sechelt, British Columbia. My mother's at the top row in the middle. She went to an Indian hospital for 2 years because her father had TB. They took my mother to the TB hospital, even though my mother didn't have TB. Her father had TB, and they didn't take him. I don't know. So she went when she was 5. She stayed until she was 7, and then she went to residential school, and eventually, and stayed there until she graduated from high school, from grade 12 in the 50s. And that was very unusual for Indigenous women to graduate from high school in the 50s. And there she met my father. My father had been on the run with his grandmother. My father was an orphan from TB. His parents had died from tuberculosis. By the time he was 16 months old, he was raised by his maternal grandmother. And the way my father explains it, and I think this is important, especially for Indigenous people, he said, my grandmother was a good woman. She was very strong and raised in our way. And when she said, I felt I would die without you, she felt she would die without her grandson. He said, I believed her. She said she felt she would die without me, and she kept me. And she knew that if she stayed on the reserve, that her grandson would be taken. So she went on the run. And he was raised traditionally until he was 15, and then taken to residential school, and he met my mother. Next slide. And I grew up with many elders. I was very lucky, and I asked them how their life was before residential school, and they said, we had nothing to do. We had nothing to do but help the people. And that was her training. That was how young people grew up. They learned by going around the village and doing whatever needed doing, whether it's carrying wood or delivering a baby, they would go. Next slide. And it was this practicality of being able to do things that made me leave acting, and I became an actor to avoid my responsibilities. Every Indigenous young person who has a bit of brains and a bit of ambition is told you have to leave your home, everything you know, and go to a university and learn things and come home and work. And I thought that sounded like the most horrible thing in the world, and I became an actor. Something light and you know, not so heavy with responsibility. Eventually, I came back to medicine, and I really felt like I would have some practical skills to help. Let's go to the next slide. And let's skip this one. This is a world that I inherited, that you inherited, that Indigenous people come in last in almost every social indicator, every measure of economic well-being. And so what can we do to help? Next slide. And we are where we are in part because of inheritance, because of you know, where we find ourselves. That residential school was real, and it had an effect on where we found ourselves. There were reasons why we were separated. Indigenous people were separated from other peoples, and there was a reason why we were put in residential schools, and it was in part, let's not be naive again, in part to separate us from our lands. Next slide. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is, and there are Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in other parts of the world, for instance, in Chile and in Argentina and in South Africa, where there were gatherings of first-person accounts of state-sanctioned human rights violations against portions of the population. In Canada, these were human rights violations against Indigenous children, who are now adults, who were subjected to these extraordinarily heinous policies of removing children from their families, putting them into institutions, forcing them to work. It was very little about education, honestly, in those systems. So it was not like a boarding school at all. It was much more like a prison for children. And if you've ever heard any of the 6,000 testimonials gathered by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they are harrowing. And I dare any of you to be residential school deniers after hearing any of those accounts. Next slide. Let's keep going. And let's, I'm a little late, so let's go forward to the next slide, and the next slide, and the next slide, and the next slide, which is about the challenge, about the difference in health outcomes between First Nations and other Canadians is unacceptable. I think it's actually immoral. It's unethical, and it's unsustainable. Next slide. And we've been asked to expand the circle so that the circle of care around us includes Indigenous people. Next slide. And we did that with the First Nations Health Authority, a health authority by First Nations people for First Nations people. Next slide. Sorry, I'm just moving through these quickly, and I will leave these with you. And we made a number of agreements that we would address Indigenous health. Next slide. And it starts with me. Indigenous people have their own perspectives on how to have health. And it's a very holistic approach, like I've described earlier. Next slide. And one of the most important things, besides having health actions, taking action to be well, which all of you do all the time, we talked about governance. Who's in charge of that? Who's in charge of Indigenous cancer? Who's in charge of Indigenous COVID? Who's in charge of Indigenous medical professionals and their training? And we asked, next slide, we asked that of many institutions, and it's a tough question. Let's go to the next slide. And we decided that cultural humility as an idea was important, important for the health professions, but also important for higher learning. Cultural humility is a lifelong process of self-reflection by you, by us, to understand our positionality, that we're working from a very particular place. So if you're, say, a nurse who's being asked to be quiet by an Indigenous patient, the nurse can say, well, I've been given this set of tasks, maybe to take some vital signs and to check on you. And it's very important to me, but I also understand, let's say, your mother is dying here in this room, and you've asked me to be quiet so you can sing and pray for her. And I won't yell at you because I'm the fancy, important nurse. We will agree that I'm doing my work and you're in your reality of helping your loved one, and we can coexist, be peaceful, in fact, even be respectful and kind to each other, and not have a clash where, you know, a toxic clash, a workplace clash, a racist event like we've heard so often. We agree to be together. Next slide. And I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide and the next slide, which is me and my friend, Emmett Aluli, next slide, who is a Hawaiian physician. And in Hawaii, they do things in the Hawaiian way. And it really was instructive to me that that's exactly what we can do in Canada. Next slide. And this is how I always felt in my education. And this cartoon says, Kaipo, you're Hawaiian. What do you think of Hawaiian issues? And it made me laugh because it was so seldom that I was asked to talk about Indigenous issues. And then when I was asked, it was incredibly painful because I was the only one at the table who was really able to talk about it at any great length. And now we do know that we need to expand this table so that it includes more brown people and that it includes more of us who know how to have inclusive dialogues with each other. Next slide. And I learned that I needed to bring more than my Western education. I need to bring my humanity, and I need to bring my Indigenous values and my love of Indigenous people in order to be effective. And so I dare all of you to do that, to bring love and authenticity. Next slide. And in our way, if we need to bring, as part of leadership, as part of being in relationship, that we need to mentor each other and we need to learn from each other as well, that we need to be respectful, to be in conversation, to seek understanding for ourselves and for others, and to make room for one another. And sometimes we need to learn to do things in a new way to get where we need to be. And I'm just going to stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for sharing all that, Dr. Adams. I made pages of actually notes. So much good information. I really appreciate you sharing some of the personal stories, because that's important. The path that has brought you to where you are, and you're right. I mean, I work in education, as do many of our listeners, and our students are here in education, and there's been so much erasure that sometimes it makes it hard to understand like why things are the way they are now if we don't go back and understand that history. I really enjoyed the conversation around the importance of pluralistic views, and it's tough. It's tough when you're a student, and it's tough for those of us that are not students anymore. But I remember that experience as a young person in university and trying to navigate that space, and I hear it all the time from our students, and it's tough, but hopefully stories like yours and other Indigenous leaders can help them navigate that and learn that in a good way. I also, you did speak a lot to, sometimes people think we don't need to notice the differences, and but you did speak to, like, we do need to notice those differences, because without noticing those differences, it makes it difficult to understand how we're going to come together and work alongside one another. And so I thank you for sharing that teaching, and also the one about balance. And I think the students, I'm sure, can attest, and I know even myself, I can attest. That's always such a struggle, right? That balance, and you said you acknowledge, like, sacrificing, and what did you sacrifice for some of your decisions in order to pursue your career and your personal goals, but also commitment to community and to family. And I think I just really appreciate that we do need to kind of acknowledge those things and be honest with ourselves, and that will help us, I think, be healthy and be well as we move forward. And I love also what you said about I wrote the love of our people, and sometimes I think that a lot of what drives us and the students, and we have amazing students at the University of Waterloo who are doing amazing things, but I can just see it is because of the love of our people and who they are, and trying to connect with our histories and contemporary realities that drives them to do, to organize the rallies that they're organizing, to pursue the career goals that they're pursuing in education. And so just some amazing things. I'm going to pop it over to Stephanie to maybe ask our first question.
Yes, so we have a great question from Heather. She says, Nyawa, how have you found two-eyed seeing helps you in approaching work broadly in colonial organizations, so universities, hospitals, museums, government, as an Indigenous person, in order to avoid feeling disconnected from our culture or feeling that your knowledge is less valuable?
Thank you. In the past, I have felt disconnected from my culture, and that's surprising to me now because I actually feel quite well connected because now I live in my own territory. I'm not a visitor in someone else's territory. I live in my own territory now, but it took me 35 years to come back here. So yeah, it was always a conscious attempt to remember, but not just remember. I remember my dad saying to me, "You can't make up our way. You have to learn it." It's you don't just get to make up some loosey-goosey thing about who we are. And that's been hard because some of our lessons are harsh. My culture is not sentimental about people. We try not to get misty-eyed about people who have gone before us, for instance. And people are taught to be strong. Like, don't complain. I know you're hungry, but it's not like you'll never be hungry. You'll never get to eat again. I know someone hurt you. Stand up strong. And that is the best revenge to live a good life. Like literally being told, get in the water and stop, like get in the cold water, have a cold water bath. It's important for your health. And I don't want to hear you scream and cry. Nobody cares. Those are tough lessons. Two-eyed seeing has always let me be very empathetic about the points of view that I'm working from. So like, for instance, government. People love to put down the government, but I'm in government and I'm very happy to try and organize from a very federal position. I remember someone saying to me, wow, whatever you're doing is, so girly. And someone else saying, what's wrong with being a girl? Like, what kind of sexist baloney are you putting out here, like, as people are meeting? And I always hear that in my head when people are, because it does happen when people are sexist. I think, what's wrong with being a woman? Women do so many things that we can't do, let alone, the fact that we never carry children as men. How useless are we? And I constantly have to remind men to not be just casually racist. Anyway, having different points of view has helped me adapt and be respectful. And it's surprising how often disrespect can come into everyday human interactions.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you have a few moments to maybe touch a little bit on COVID and what you're seeing as the impact, in particular for Indigenous communities, Indigenous peoples.
Yes, and COVID is my everyday. Just to say that Indigenous people in Canada in the first wave in April of 2020 were very well protected. Our COVID rates were 40% that of other Canadians, but now it's reversed. Our likelihood of getting COVID as Indigenous people is 1.8 times higher that of other Canadians. And we talk a lot about, well, what is it about the person that means they get COVID? And that's actually a kind of blaming of the patient for where they find themselves. And now we talk much more about, well, in places where people have a hard time washing their hands, COVID is higher. In places where people are underhoused or are homeless, they are way more prone to COVID and to poorer outcomes. And so we frame it around that. And of course, Indigenous peoples have very much poorer social determinants of health than other Canadians. And they've arrived at COVID with poorer health than other Canadians. So if we're in poorer health generally and we get COVID, generally we're not going to do as well. And so that's kind of a very broad overview of how COVID is plaguing us. The rollout is very particular for Indigenous peoples because we live in such particular situations. People forget that we live literally at the margins of Canadian society, and that we live in very particular ways that are very different from other Canadians. So the rollout of vaccination is very particular to us, and the operationalizing of the rollout is idiosyncratic and quite extraordinary.
Thank you. I'm very conscious that Stephanie has to go to class at 1 o'clock, and that's important, and we don't want them to be late for that. I'm just going to double check if Stephanie has any other burning questions to ask as a up and coming medical student, and or what her peers might wonder.
I guess so. I heard you talk a bit about the pain of living with the duality of being a student and also an Indigenous person, and the pain of like missing out on certain life events. And I know that in terms of medical students, like I have peers who take longer to finish their degrees, or sometimes they don't even finish them because of this pain. And I was wondering if you have any tips at all for institutions in medical education or just in education in general, that they can maybe like practical tips that they can implement to help better support these students.
Yeah, I think it's very important for them to have Indigenous faculty, and the Indigenous faculty will look after the Indigenous students and their particular realities. So for instance, if I needed to go home for the death of a cousin, and that was very difficult for a non-Indigenous faculty member to understand, I could go to the Indigenous faculty and say, you understand why I need to go, right? I can't go to every cousin's funeral, of course not. You know, schooling is very important, but at least they can hear, or they can say, you know, we learn in a different way, or Indigenous students have to work so much harder just to get to the same place as another student. For instance, I remember one of my fellow students saying that her dad had bought her a house to live in, to go to medical school, and that she had no household duties at all. Her mother cooked and cleaned and looked after her, and I thought, my God, I have like children. I have to work apart from being a medical student. Nobody bought me a house. Nobody even bought me a bicycle to help me with medical school. It's amazing how much we had to do to be here. And I think that recognition of how we are just slightly different is important, and the faculty can help with that. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Great question, Steph. I understand some of her classmates are watching as well, so that's good. So they're going to be hopefully a little bit forgiving if she's a couple of minutes late. But I'm reading multiple notes here. Maybe one more question, and I have to go back and forth between different things. Give me 1 sec here. Okay, just to remind folks that this is being recorded and we will be publishing it, so you can share it with your peers, and so certainly all Stephanie and across her peers, I'm sure will share. Okay, here's a question, I think. Have you ever sought Indigenous knowledge, elders or healers for a means of healing or resolving COVID?
Resolving COVID. We have turned to elders to help us with vaccine distribution, because so many people are afraid of the vaccine because of their historical relationships with the medical system, with big pharma, with big government. So with Indigenous people, we have to remind them, this is not about that. This is about a pandemic that's kind of bad. Sometimes medicine is there to help you and not to hurt you. In fact, a lot of the time. And if you as elders are accepting of help, because elders are very interested in helping people, they can help us with that. And of course, vaccinations can coexist with traditional medicine, and I'm not a traditional medicine person, so I won't even touch upon that. But definitely doing vaccines in an Indigenous way is just the way to go. Thank you so much for today. This has been extraordinary.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. And you're right, we do have a bit of a sordid history of how the medical system and most of the systems have treated our people. And yeah, and I think vaccination is important, and happy to hear that.
And if I might add, for Stephanie, I think to be a good doctor, you actually have to surrender yourself and say, I will do this with all my heart, not hesitate, not disbelieve myself, but open my heart to this to be the best doctor I can. And for people who are receiving vaccines, because our way is medicine won't work unless you believe your medicine it will be good. If you take medicine thinking this is poison, this is baloney, it's not going to be great for you. So for us as Indigenous people, we understand that we need to bring our higher selves, our belief and our faith and our respect. So thanks. I just wanted to finish with that.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. I was going to ask if you had just a couple of closing remarks, but that really summed it up, I think. And I've heard that teaching before from old ones out here, and so I thank you for that. Do you have any other last comments, or are you ready to end on that note?
I just want people to be excited again about being in relationship. I don't know what it is about. Some people think it's good to be too cool for school. I think it's okay for us to be open to each other, to be excited by each other, like I was in Hawaii, and just open to Hawaiian culture and loving it. And I'm using that as an example because I'm sure all of you can imagine yourself in Hawaii and saying, yes, of course, a beautiful place, a beautiful culture, a paradise. I am open to all this. And to bring it back to us, we live in a paradise. We live amongst beautiful people. We can be excited about each other and reach out and be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those closing words and for that teaching. I think that can really help us move forward in a good way and alongside each other. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We got to a couple of the questions, and just really grateful, Dr. Adams, for you to be able to join us today, and for the whole team that managed to put the scenario together for us to connect in this digital format, and also to thank Stephanie for joining us. And just going to throw a plug out there. I got the honor of helping support her with a reference letter to get into medical school. So I'm thinking ahead, right? I will need a caregiver one day, so it's good to people get out there. So thank you, everybody, so much. And I hope that you all have a good day and stay safe and stay healthy and stay connected. Going to go within a while. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.